Good morning. Guys, how's the
Good morning,
sound?
Rabbi.
Sound is okay?
Perfect. Yep, great.
That's great. All right. Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Tzadik Beis. We are in the middle of the machlokes between Rav on one side and Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel on the other side, applying the shita of Rabbi Shimon. So after we further clarified the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, we had on Daf Tzadik Aleph, Rav, Shmuel, and Rabbi Yochanan, all of them say that the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. However, Rav limits his leniencies. Says Rav, when does Rabbi Shimon indeed allow you to carry any article aside from a house into a house, aside from an article that began in the house to another domain? If it's something that began in a chatzir, you can take it from a chatzir to a gag, to a karpev, to a mavui. That's only when it's beginning in a chatzir that did not have a internal eruv, v'hu shaloi eruv, which makes a lot of sense, like Rav says, because if an article that you are carrying from a chatzir is coming from a chatzir that has a internal eruv, so therefore the people that live in those homes are permitted to carry things from their homes into the chatzir, how do you know that what you will end up carrying did not originate in a home? And Rab Shimon explicitly says in the Mishnah that when does he allow his leniency to consider all reshuyas hayachits, a side of a house, to be such that you can carry from one to the other? That's only for money, only for kalim that began in the chatzir. Money debatim, if you have an eruv, you can take it from the bayis to the chatzir. But then even according to Rab Shimon, you are not allowed to take it mechatzir lachatzir. So Rav limits halachic Rab Shimon, but only v'hu shaloi ervu. On the other hand, Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel, they also paskin like Rab Shimon, but they are much broader. They say that shitas Rab Shimon is bein ervu ubein loy ervu. That's where we're up to, and we're going to start on Daf Tzadik Aleph, Amid Beis, all the way in the bottom. We're going to be challenging the shita here of Rabbi Yochanan. Now, what we did not speak out yesterday, that's something that the Gemara is going to introduce today. According to Rav, what's going to happen if you have two chatzeros, one adjacent to the other? One chatzer did not make an eruv, lo yeru, which is clearly the kula alma, the chatzer from which you can take kalim into a neighbor. But what happens if the neighbor chatzer did make an eruv? Now the chatzer that made an eruv internally, lerav, taking something from there to another chatzer is not allowed. The question is, do we say, okay, the Isur is only a one-way street, but coming from the chatzir that was not ma'ariv to a chatzir that is ma'ariv, maybe will be permitted, maybe not, maybe we'll make it gzeira. If you can go one way, maybe you're going to go the other way. That will be the new nuance of this Shitas Rav that we'll discuss on Daf Tzadik Beis. Towards the end of Daf Tzadik Beis, we're going to have a Mishnah that we quoted many times. We never quoted it, we never applied it to its basic application that we'll learn today. And that is when you have two adjacent roofs, one of them is large. Large means it's wider. We'll need a picture for that. And it goes into a roof that's narrower, a gag gadol that's samach legag cotton. So we're going to, as we say, even lerav that does not allow good asik from a mechitza that's completely not visible, but everyone subscribes to good asik regarding using the walls that are in the externality of the house, on the periphery of the house, that does go up. So if one gag is wider than the other, because of good asik, the wider roof will have what we will call gefufe, side posts. And as we'll speak out when we have a picture to make it clearer, those side posts are valid as a fourth mechitza. And therefore, as the Mishnah says the words, that we view the small Gag as completely open to the big one, and therefore we view the small Gag as a Pesach, as an entrance to the big one. And as the Gemara further elaborates this principle by using the words that the Yoyre Gedoyla Biktana, which means that the large entrance extends into the small one. We'll explain what that means. The aim the Yoyre Ketana Begedoyla. The small Chatzir, the small Gag does not influence the large one. And we're going to see how this principle is Nageya. First of all, we are learning over here ERUVIN to the dinim of carrying, but the Gemara is going to also apply it today, the Kalayim, the Gittin, to a dinim of Shliach Tzibur, to dinim of a minyan, all of these cases where there are some people here or some people there. And ultimately, the final will be, the fifth case will be to Tsoya regarding Kriya Shema. We're not allowed to say words of Kedusha. Number one, when there's a bad odor. But even if there's not a bad odor, we're not allowed to say Shema and other words of Kedusha when we are in the presence of something filthy, of excrement. So all of these cases will be that if you're going to be in the large one and the Tsoya will be in the small one or vice versa, how that will affect the din of saying Kriya Shema. And God willing, we're going to conclude today's daf with Abaye's wonderment that how is it possible that having a mechitza will actually create a problem, which will be, as Abaye will point out, our case, when normally a mechitza resolves all issues coming back to ERUVIN and to Shabbos v'chuli. Okay, so Nachmol Chedra, we have a machloikis in Tanoye, as Rav Yehud explained it. Rav Shimon is certainly the most lenient one. Not only do we paskin like Rabbi Shimon, but we have a machlokes between Rav, and on the other side, Rabbi Yechanan and Shmuel. How broadly does Rav Shimon say his dinin? Do we qualify it or not? And Shmuel and Rabbi Yechanan were the most lenient opinions. They hold that Rav Shimon allows you to carry mechatzir l'chatzir, even if the chatzir has a internal eruv, which means that there's a possibility that money, the batim, will make themselves into that chatzir. And if that were to happen, those manim, which means kalim, may not be carried. Seder, so halk up. The kalim that did not begin Shabbos and the bayis may be carried mechatzir l'chatzir. So the last words on Daf Tzadik Aleph, Amid Beis. Says the Gemara, Omar le Ravina le Ravashi, Daf Tzadik Beis, Umi Omar Rabbi Yechanan Hachi, we paskin like Rav Shimon. And that psak is bein eruv, bein lo eruv. V'ha, we have the same great Rabbi Yechanan that has this klal, which is halacha kistam Mishnah. In other words, whenever Rabbeinu HaKadosh is quoting a opinion, someone's opinion in a Mishnah, without attributing it to its author, he doesn't say divrei, quoting whoever said it. He writes it stam. The reason, normally, you have to say omer davar, b'shem omerei. The reason why Rebbe sometimes doesn't attribute a halacha, a Mishnah, in the name of a individual, that's Rebbe's way of saying that this halacha became accepted by the consensus follows this halacha. It might have been introduced by one, but everyone subscribes to it, and therefore this is the halacha. And Vitnan, we learned this together. Mishnah daf ayin vava mit beis, koisel shubein beis chatzeros. If you have two chatzeros that has a wall, there is no Pesach in this wall. There is no chaloin in this wall. The two chatzeros don't even have an option to be ma'arab one with the neighboring one. And the wall has to have the halachic minimum height of a wall, which is Gavaya Saram. Says the Mishnah, if the wall is Roichav Arba'a, Roichav here means it's deep, which means that the area on top of the wall is a bona fide Rishus HaYachid. So first of all, Ma'arvin Shnayim ve'ei Ma'arvin Echad, because there's no Pesach, nor Chaloin. Then Mishnah says weiter, what happens? Hoyu b'roishoy peiros. So the Mishnah says, Elu oilen mikan va'oichlin ve'elu oichlin mikan va'oichlin. Members of each chatzir, they may not take anything up to the wall. They may not take anything down from the wall, but something that's already on the wall, since they are in a separate Rishus HaYachid, both of them can go up there and eat it there. Ubavat shaloi yoiridu lamato, they may not bring it down. Now let me ask you a question, Chadr. Let's think about this. First of all, this is a Stam Mishnah. And halachas kistam Mishnah. Does this sound like Rab Shimon? What does Rab Shimon hold? Rab Shimon holds that as long as there isn't a keli that began Shabbos inside a home, you may carry, even without an Eruv Chatzeres, you may carry from any Rishus HaYachid to any other Rishus HaYachid, exclude a house. So why would you not be allowed, these pictures are confusing, this type of picture. Why would you not be allowed to take food from the Rishus HaYachid wall down onto the Chatzar? Now let me answer the question. According to Rav, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why, according to Rav. We paskin like Rab Shimon, Stam Mishnah ke Rab Shimon. The Mishnah is speaking about a case where the neighboring Chatzeros did not make an eruv one with the other. They cannot because there's no Pesach in the wall. But each Chatzer made their own internal eruv. And what is Rav saying? That Rab Shimon is not speaking about a Chatzer that made an internal eruv. Because if you're going to take it from the wall onto the Chatzer, you might bring it into the house because there's an eruv, an internal eruv. And if you bring it into the house, you might end up bringing something from the house into the Chatzer and then bringing it on top of the wall. So that we get, the moment there is an internal eruv, even Rab Shimon is machmin, and he doesn't allow you to, and he will not allow you to take it, like we're learning in the Mishnah, from the top of the wall to the Chatzer. But according to you, Rabbi Yechanan, like Shmuel, you hold that Rab Shimon is lenient, that you may carry from the Rishus HaYachid wall to the Chatzer, or vice versa, even if that internal Chatzer made an eruv. So why would you not be allowed to take something off the wall, bringing it into the Chatzer? Why not? Or why would you not be allowed to be malin from the Chatzer to the top? Why not? So what that you did not make a eruv with your neighboring Chatzer? You can carry to your neighboring Chatzer. As long as you're not taking something from a bias into the other person's Chatzer, there's no problem. Gavaldik. And again, in other words, stamish like Rab Shimon. So this is Shitas Rab Shimon, and you see that Rab Shimon is machmir. And the only way to explain it is following Rav, because the Mishnah is speaking about internal eruv chatzeres. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, there's no difference. So answers the Gemara that you know what that Mishnah means. Mai lamata. What may you not do? Lamata labatim. You may not take something that's from the top of the wall into the chatzer, into the bias. Okay, nachanami. That you may not do, even according to Rab Shimon. But according to Rab Shimon and Rabbeinu HaKadosh allows that. You are allowed to take something from the top of the wall down onto the Chatzer. You are allowed to take something from the Chatzer that was not in the house when Shabbos came in, and yes, malin to the top of the wall. B'chlal, this is a big window into all of the many Mishnayos that we learned earlier. Once you think about this three-way machlokes, you'll have to limit or apply every statement of those Mishnayos for each Tana according to his sheet.
Rabbi, is the wall a makim p'tur or Rishus HaYachid? The wall itself, on top of the wall, is that a makim p'tur or Rishus HaYachid?
Rishus HaYachid. It's a Rishus HaYachid.
So if it's a Rishus b'fnei atzmai, how's he taking? The wall is a
Rishus HaYachid.
Right. So how's he taking from Rishus HaYachid into another Rishus HaYachid?
Because according to Rab Shimon, you're very lenient. According to Rab Shimon, let's say everything you have to go back now. The only issue from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaYachid is money, the bottom. Kalim that did not begin in a house, according to Rab Shimon, you can take it from any type of Rishus HaYachid to any other type of Rishus HaYachid, which will include from the top of the wall onto the Chatzer. How can you say that the Rebbe's Mishnah is only prohibiting you to take it from the wall to the Chatzer to the bias for Hatani Rab Chia Torah Braisa. Braisa is more elaborate. And here he's adding extra words which make it clear that it's not so. Ubulvad, when there's this wall in between these two chatzeros, shelo yeheze oimed b'mekoymoi va'oichel. B'mekoymoi means you can't take it down to his chatzer. B'mekoymoi doesn't mean your house. The top of the wall is shared by both, so both can eat there. But you can't take it to your makoym, which means only your chatzer that need it. And v'ze oimed b'mekoymoi va'oichel. Clearly, the isur is even only to take it into the chatzer. And again, l'rav, there is no problem. Stam Mishnah can be like Rab Shimon. The Mishnah is speaking about that every chatzer made their own eruv. Beautiful. But Rabbi Yechanan doesn't care about that. And the Gemara is going to do something a little bit unusual. Indeed, you're right that the Tana, the Braisa that Rab Chia taught, does not lend itself to the Shita of Rabbi Yechanan in Rab Shimon. But we're going to say that the statement of Rab Chia is not authoritative. We're not going to accept this Braisa. Based on what? Not to make it into a problem with Rabbi Yechanan. Based on the rule that everything has to be hinted in Mishnayos. That's the statement that if Rebbe lo shana chia minayin. Hasidim use this expression homiletically that if you don't see the Rebbe at least once a year, how can you even live? But it means the nigla pshat is that Rebbe goes to the Mishnayos, Rab Chia goes to the Braises. Amalevichi Rebbe lo shana Rab Chia minayin loy. From the Mishnah, it's not mashma that the Isra is just not to take it down and eat it in the chutzner. No, Rabbeinu HaKadosh means don't take it off the wall into the chutzner, into the house. And indeed, Rab Chia is adding a nuance that's not even hinted to in the Mishnah. How does Rab Chia know it? In andere Werter, we are not accepting this brayse from Rab Chia. Rab Chia's brayse is not authoritative, so don't slug up Rabbi Yochanan from a non-authoritative brayse taught by Rab Chia. Okay. Atkan Shmuel, Atkan Rabbi Yochanan. We're going back to Rav. Guys, remember, Rav holds that when are you allowed to carry? Michatzer l'chatzer? Only if each individual chatzer did not make an eruv. So it's very unlikely that something that began in the house will end up in the chatzer. It's possible. We learned the end of Daf Tzadik Aleph Amud Beis. You can take your hat out, wear it from the house, and then take it off in the chatzer, and then carry it, which will be a problem. So it's possible, but it's unlikely. Okay. Now, the new case. What's going to happen if one chutzner is neighboring the other? This one made an internal eruv, and this one did not. According to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rav Shmuel, who cares? Carry. But according to Rav, what's going to be the din? Now, we're introducing it by giving the following case. Itmar. Shtei chatzeros v'churva achas beinayim. Okay, if you can see that, there's a churva in between two chatzeros. No eruv was made between these two chatzeros. Did each chatzer internally make an eruv? One yes and one not. Achas erva internally. The achas lo erva. So what will be the issue? According to Rab Shimon, theoretically, there's no problem carrying from the chatzer into the churva. According to Rab Shimon, the chatzer that made an eruv, which allows them to take money the batim into that chatzer, they made an eruv. Those kalim may not be taken into the churva. So do we decree that nothing should be taken to the churva? Okay. And then on the other side, the other chatzer that did not make an eruv, they for sure l'cha'ira should be allowed to carry from their chatzer into the churva. So there's indeed a machlokes. What will be the shita of Rav? It's a machlokes between the Talmud of Rav and the son of Rav. Amar Rav Huna, Talmidoi Rav, ultimately the Mamala Makim of Rav, that let's follow shitas Rav. Noisnin oistelo zushul erva. The churva was completely given over to the chatzer that does not have an internal eruv because that's shitas Rav Shimon. Lo erva, you can carry from the chatzer to the churva. Avo l'she erva, the chatzer, the other's chatzer, the other side of the churva, loy, they may not carry, not from their chatzer into the churva, nor from the churva into the chatzer, because dilma asila fuke manedavatim lo churva. This is mamashitas Rav. That makes a lot of sense. It's just being consistent. However, Chiyam Bar Rav is now quoting the words that he heard from his father regarding this very case, and the words that he heard from his father was af. Also allowed or also not allowed? That is not clear. However, according to this version, when Chia Barav quoted his father, he then interpreted that when my father said the words af l'she'erva, you know what that means. Not l'she'erva that you are allowed to. Af l'she'erva that you're not allowed to. V'shneyem asuros. Now, guys, understand that this is not mamish like two chatzeros, one near the other. There's another nuance here. There's a churva in between. Okay, what will Rav hold? Not with the churva. Again, that was never spoken out. We're going to speak this out right now. Now, why would he say that shnei masuros? Why l'chayra, the one that does not have an eruv internally, why would they not be allowed to carry to the churva? Well, the answer would be maybe you make a gzeda. If you're going to allow them, maybe you're going to allow the other side. And indeed, that's how he learns that my father meant the shtei masuros. And then Chia, the son of Rav, goes on to substantiate his understanding in his father. That the im toimer, if you're going to tell me that the words that my father said, that Rav says, af l'she'erva means shtei mutaros, why would we even say that? Why would we say that? No, I don't accept that. Because so Chibarav is assuming the following. Again, now forget about the churva. Think about it simple. Two chatzeiros, one neighboring the other. One made an internal eruv. The other did not make an internal eruv. We're going with the premise that vadai, the one that made an internal eruv, lerav, they cannot carry from their chatzir to the one that made an eruv. Because the one that made an eruv, the one that cannot carry from the one that made an eruv to the one that did not make an eruv. Because that's Rav B'shitas Rav Shimon. More than that, what about the other way around? Now we have a doubt. Maybe yeah, maybe not. You can argue, yeah, they did not make an eruv, so they should be allowed to carry. Or you can argue you make a gzeira. So even though Rav never spoke about it, but it's a given that the chatzir that did make a internal eruv, they will not be allowed to carry to the chatzir that did not make an eruv. So therefore, im timer, how can you even think that my father meant shtei mutarais? Why? Just like my two chatzeiros, for sure, the one that made an eruv cannot carry out. So why would this one be allowed to carry into the churva? So therefore, he's saying it must be that when my father said the words af l'she'erva, what my father meant was we make a gzeira and shtei masurais. Counters now the Gemara Techia Barav, I disagree with you. Maybe when your father said in the case of the churva the words that va'af l'she'erva, maybe your father meant shtei mutarais. You're asking a good kasha, why will this be different to two chatzeiros, one adjacent to the other? One was ma'araf and one was not, says the Gemara Hassan. Even the menatre man of the bottom of chatzir, it's common for people to take elim out of the house into the chatzir. That's the whole svara of Rav. And if they made an eruv, halachically, they could do so, and therefore they will do so. So if you will allow people to carry from the chatzir that was ma'ariv into the chatzir that was not ma'ariv, so maybe asalafuke, and you'll be oiver, which is why you're not allowed to do it. But over here, since the churva, we're speaking about a churva, kiven the loy menatre man the chatzir bechurva, we're using a chatzir is something less common because a churva itself is an area that it's easy to vandalize. It's a churva. So maybe since bechlal people don't make that much huge over there, we're not afraid loy asi lafuke as a klal, and for the rare occasions that people want to make use of it, maybe here Rav will say that even if you're coming from a chatzir that did make a internal eruv, that might have kalim that began in the bias, they'll be mindful that not to carry in the churva. Because bechlal, the whole usage in the churva is downgraded, is used less. So therefore, Chia, who thought that his father said shtei masurais, the Gemara is rejecting that. And furthermore, the Gemara has another version that Adarabbe Ikeda Amri, that Chia himself argued with Rav Huna because he had the words of his father. And again, even though his father said the words af l'she'erva, so not like Rav Huna that only one side can use it, not the other side, only the side that was lo yerva, both can use. And my father meant shtei mutarais. In this version, the Eimad shtei masurais, the fisha ein noisnen chatzir shaloi erva li chatzir she'erva. In the case of the two adjacent chatzeiros, one erva, one lo erva, even though you can argue, we never heard directly from Rav, we can have a suffix whether the one that was lo yerva, whether they can use, but for sure the one that was ma'ariv internally, for sure they cannot carry to their neighbor. That's the whole shitas Rav. Why would this be both mutarais? So the Gemara itself now explains. Hassan over there, chatzir to chatzir, keeping the menatrim on the bottom of chatzir. So many kelim of the house will be in the chatzir. Therefore, lishana would abanon to take from a chatzir that has an eruv with its batim, to carry it to the neighboring chatzir, because you might end up la'afuke akeli that was shavas babayis. But since to begin with in a churva, our people don't put kalim there, so the possibility that something is going to ultimately transfer over to the churva is much lesser. So there we don't make such a gzeira. There Rav will hold like Shmuel and like Rabbi Yechanan that l'shitas Rab Shimon, as long as you are not carrying money the bottom, yes, you can carry. Okay, so it turned out at the end that there is a machlokes b'shitas Rav, one from his Talmud and one from his son, and his son is quoting words from Rav himself that actually is now clearly understood to be lenient, and you can carry it both ways. Okay, now we're beginning the sugya with the gag. Now, I know that when we quoted this just a few daf ago, we were quoting the gag gadol and the gag cotton b'shitas chachamim. That was their chumrah. The one chumrah that we have from the chachamim is that Rav Meir allows you to carry migag legag. The chachamim do not. My friends, this Mishnah is not only lechachamim. Forget about it's not related. This Mishnah, like Rashi explicitly writes, can go with Rav Meir. What is the Mishnah speaking about? Guys, listen, every time you think about a chutzner, you have batim that open up into a chutzner. If they were ma'ariv, they can all use the chutzner. If even one person who has access to this chutzner was not ma'ariv, without bittul reshus, he ruins it for everyone. Here, don't think about a chutzner. Many batim have access to a roof. Same concept. So all of the batim that have access to the roof, they have to be ma'ariv on that roof for them to be allowed to carry from their bias to the roof, even according to Rab Shimon. From a house, you have to have a neighbor. Now, if the roof is neighboring another roof, let's go back to the dinim we learned before. If two chatzeros are neighboring the other, so if there is a wall in between them, even if the wall has a pesach or a chaloim, at least they have an option. If they want, they can be ma'arav echad. But if they want, they can be ma'arav separately. Members of the neighboring chutzner, through the window, through the door, can go into yours. It doesn't matter. They don't have to join. That's the case over here. The gagois are mamash adjacent one the other. Being that one gag is gadol, so from one side there are two protrusions to the right or to the left, like we showed before in the previous sugyas. Everyone is going to subscribe to good asik mechitzah regarding mechitzas that are on the outside of the house. So these mechitzas of the gag gadol are going to create side posts that when you are standing in the gadol, from the perspective of those that are standing in the gadol, when they look into the cotton, if you can just imagine those walls coming up, they're going to see walls on both sides. So therefore, there is a wall for them, separating the big to the small. And therefore, the people that have access to the gag cottons, not joining a joint eruv with them is not a problem. Not a problem. As long as they made an internal eruv, even though, again, members of the gag cotton can go up to their gag and then walk over to the large gag, so what? People that are standing in the gadol can say that we have a wall separating the big and the small. And the moment there's a wall, ratzu, if they wanted, they could have joined the joint eruv all together. But if they wanted, they could have made two separate eruv. In the reverse, since if you're standing on the small gag, that side is nifratz, completely open to your neighboring gag. So it's called a pirza. In the case where both gagois did not join in the same one joint eruv, so members that live under the gag cotton cannot carry to the roof, even if they were all ma'arav together. Why? Because the neighboring gag did not join their eruv, and it's completely open. Here, from their perspective, they had to join all together. Let's read inside the Mishnah. Gag gadol, that's samach legag cotton. So if you want to know whether you can carry from your batim to your gag gadol, yes, you could. Why? Because of good asik mechitzta. The good asik mechitzta will create two side posts, and we're speaking as a given that the open space in between them is not more than 10 amas. It's not called a pirtz, it's called a pesach. They could have joined, but they don't have to join with members of the other gag. Masha inkin v'hakoton, from the perspective of the small roof, there aren't any side posts, and therefore it's nifratz b'maloyot to the gag gadol. Whenever you have a adjacent reshus hayachid, into which you are completely open to, you have to join an eruv together with them. In our Mishnah's case, everyone that lived under the gag cotton joined with themselves, but no one joined with anyone. There was no joint with the gag gadol, so therefore they may not carry from their house onto the gag. And therefore, this Mishnah is not referring l'chachamim. This Mishnah is referring le'kula al. Now the Mishnah is going to give what will appear to be the same exact din, not Gag, but Chatzar. Same concept. You have a wider Chatzar, the Gadol means it's wider. It goes into a narrower Chatzar. There is no wall separating the two Chatzeres. Again, because here you don't need good asik. Here, because you have a Chatzar with walls surrounding both of them together, nothing in between them, but the outer walls of the Gadol become side posts from the perspective of the Chatzar Gedolah, and therefore it's considered a wall, and therefore the non-joining with everyone on this narrower side is not a problem, and vice versa, it is a problem. Problem meaning that Chatzar Gedolah Shenifrat Salik Tana, can you carry from the bottom in the Gedolah into the Chatzar of the Gedolah? Yes, you may. Members of the Ketana are also in the same larger yard. No, they're not. There is a halachic wall. Masha'en gained members balabatim in the Ketana. They may not carry from their homes into the Chatzar Ketana. Why? These are words of the Mishnah. Because since from the perspective of the Ketana, they are completely open to the Gedolah, now the Mishnah could have said because there's no wall. These walls we're going to build on these words of the Mishnah. Review the entire Ketana as an entranceway to the Gedolah. Now, it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing. And again, before we get into this last liner of the Mishnah, that will build the whole building on top, first of all, why did the Mishnah have to mention both Gag and Chatzar when it's the same thing? The second white line, so the Gemara answers, because now that we learned on Daf Peites the Machloikas Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel was speaking about Chshitas Chachamim. I know that. But what was their issue? L'shitas Chachamim, that you may not carry Migag L'Gag, could you carry on the Gag itself? Remember that? So Rav said that you may not even carry more than Daladamas on the Gag itself. Because it's Nifritza, B'Meloy, L'Mekaymo Asr Loy. Remember that? Okay. So now, L'Rav, Ketani, Gag, Dumi, the Chatzir. According to Rav, we Dafke wanted to bring the case of Chatzir to tell you that even though Rav, in the case of the Mishnah Daf Peites, does not allow you to use good asik mechitzta, because there the mechitzta that we were trying to use, there the Mishnah was not speaking about gadol and katan. There they were speaking about a box. There it's not about having side posts, it's simply about using good asik, even though that wall is completely covered by the roof and the ceiling. That's not the case of our Mishnah. So we wanted to point out that just like by a chatzah, minkar mechitzta, by a chatzah you don't need good asik at all. You can see the mechitzas. Av Gag, unlike on Daf Peites, because of the Gag being a Gag Gadol, and because you are able to go to the edge of your roof and look down and physically see the walls of the house, since minkar mechitzta, even Rav does allow us to use good asik, which is what's creating the side posts, which is what's helping all of the members of the Gag Gadol. Beautiful. Shmuel needed to have both dinim because he wanted to teach you something else. Gag Yugad Chatzir. Like I have a kasha. The whole thing is a kasha. What's the kasha? According to Shmuel, why can't the members of the Gag Cotton guys use the Gag Cotton? Why not? Because it's nifratza b'meloyed to the Gag Gadol? No. Isn't there under the roof and the ceiling, isn't there a wall separating the bottom? Sure there is. Doesn't Shmuel say, you say good asik mechitzta, even though the Gag is completely not discernible? So forget about side posts. It's much better than side posts. According to Shmuel, there should be a full-fledged wall. And that should allow both sides. So that's why the Mishnah mentioned Chatzir, because the case of the Mishnah is not like the case on Daf Peites. On Daf Peites, we were speaking about a Gag that's not used as often. However you apply that halachically. And therefore, according to Shmuel, good asik, even though the wall is not visible at all. However, even Shmuel is maida that if many people are making use of the roof, which means people are walking back and forth, the people did not stay in their area. They shared it, just like, for example, by Lavud, if you're using good nachis, a mechitza that broke. So a gedoyim boikim boy. Same concept over here. If people are constantly walking back and forth over the halachic good asik mechitza, our usage and going back and forth nullifies the good asik. Because how can you say that the wall goes up? People cannot walk through a wall. So what type of gag is the Mishnah referring to? A gag that is being used like the chatzir. My chatzir, de facto, is a metzias. Kadar se'lo rabbim. The type of gag gadol and gag kotel is, that's where everyone was there the whole time. Av gag nami de kadar se'lo rabbim. And that this allows even Lishmuel to use the mechitza that's under the whole width separating the gadol and the cotton. We don't say gudasik. Now, even according to Shmuel, the outer walls, the gepufe, of course we say gudasik. No one is walking on the air. So that's Bein Lanav, Bein Shmuel. You have these nuances which will allow both of them to learn this Mishnah and not to have their shitois and daf peites refuted. Okay. So now we are 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. As we mentioned, the Mishnah gave the case of Chatzar Gedoyla, Chatzar Ketana. The Mishnah did not need to write the words, Mepnei shehi kepischa shel Gedoyla. It's not just another way of wording things. There's a huge chiddush in this statement. Says the Gemara that like this: the following 3 Amoraim, Yosef Rabba, and Abzeira, and Rabba Bar Rav Chanan, these 3 were sitting. Happened to be that Abaye that was nearby overheard their learning. The Yosef Abaye Gabayu. We're going to learn, God willing, on Amid Beis, the statement, the pushback that Abaye had on what he's hearing. But first, we have to quote what these 3 great Amoraim say. The Yosef V'Ka'amah, Shma Minomi Masnisim. The fact that the Mishnah concluded with words that you can even argue are superfluous. Finished. The Mishnah could have said, just like by the Gag, that Chatzar Gedoyla Muteres, Uketana Asura. End the Mishnah there. The Mishnah adds, Mipnei shehi kepischa shel ulam. Oh. So now it notes, why is Rebbe telling us that we are designating the small chatzir? The whole small chatzir is like an entranceway to the big one. So like we mentioned, we're going to apply this, my friends, to Kalayim, to Gittin, to Shliach Tzibur, to Minyan, and to Tzoya B'Krishma. We're going to apply this to 5 dinim, not even related to ERUVIN. What's the rule? The Yoirei Gedoyla, the residents of the large chatzir, they automatically extend into the entirety of the small one. They influence the entirety of the small one. Like we said, the whole small one is like an entrance to the big one, and not the other way around. The Ein the Yoirei Ketana B'Gedoyla. In other words, the small chatzir has 0 influence in the large chatzir. The small chatzir doesn't go in, not physically, it doesn't influence, its status stops. In other words, these gepufe, these side posts, it creates a one-way direction. The Gedoyla goes into the Ketana doesn't go into the Gedoyla, and Ketzad meaning, why am I saying that? L'may nafkamina, what application? And we're gonna have, like we mentioned, the 5 applications. So here we're beginning with the last line on the Amid. A few words of introduction here is needed. According to Rashi, our Gemara is specifically speaking about Kalayim Midrabanan. Midoi Raisa, you may not plant grapes with grains and with 2 types of greens, Midoi Raisa. We are dafka speaking about all types of yirakos, all types of greens that are only prohibited mid-derabanan to plant with vines. I want you to know that the isur derabanan is ke'ein de'oiraisa. If one did mix, however you consider mixing, greens and vines and grapes, not only did you violate something, but it's going to be asur bahana'a, like kalayim is de'oiraisa, asur bahana'a. But the advantage of applying this whole sugya only concerning a derabanan dika kalayim is, when did the Rabbanan say you may not derive benefit if there is a mixture? Only if your planting was in violation of the Darabanan. We're going to learn a case in a moment where if the act of planting is not in violation, even if there's then going to be a mixture, if the mixture is midoi raisa, then it's asur bahana. Even if you did not violate a prohibition while you were planting it. Here we're speaking about only on a Darabanan. If you are not violating the planting, then you will allow to have hana. Now, a couple of things we learned this all together. How much of a separation do you need to have for you not to consider it mixed? If you remember by Kalayim, there's also this Maras Ayin concept. So like this, if you have a halachic kerem vineyard, then other items have to be distanced 4 amas. If you have a single vine, or whatever is not a halachic kedem, guys, you have to distance it 6 tfachim. Let's go now that you're planting a halachic kedem in one of the 2 chatzeros, either in the gedolah or in the ketana, which means that normally you would need to have 4 amas of a separation. But we also learned another rule, that if you have 2 environments that are separated with a wall, with a halachic wall, you can plant vineyards, the vines, all the way up into the wall of one side, and you can plant whatever else all the way up to the wall to the other side, even if de facto there is some mixture. That was the marasai midoiraisa. If it's clear that it's separated, it's less problematic, or sometimes it's mamish non-problematic. Now let's apply this over here. Every line here is gold. Ketzad. If you first planted gefanim, a vineyard in the big one. Now another very important nuance. If the big one, if I planted it in the big one, 4 amas away from the Pesach, away from the side posts, then b'chlal there's no problem planting greens in the ketana, because even when you have a kedem b'chlal, if there's 4 amas separation, you can plant whatever you want. Here we're speaking about a case that you planted a vineyard in the gedolah. You are within 4 amas from the door. So normally you would say, I don't care, go to the end, measure 4 amas, and plant whatever you want the ketana. Rabbeinu HaKadosh writes in the Mishnah the words that the ketana is kepischa shel gedolah, which means the yoyre gedolah biktana. The gedolah goes into the whole ketana. Since the gefanim, the kedem, is not beyond 4 amas from that wall between the ketana and the gedolah, so now you have a chiddush. Even if physically you will measure 4 amas away, you may not ever plant even lizroya greens, which is the rabbanan, in the ketana. Beautiful, because the yoyre gedolah b'ketana. What about vice versa? V'im zara. And if you did plant b'ketana, another chiddush, you did plant, you violated an isur de rabbanan. So now, normally when there's a mixture, none of it can be eaten. No, so say these 3 amoyim, not over here. Only the zeroim are asurim, because you planted the zeroim from the perspective of the zeroim, from the perspective of the ketana, in the entrance of the gedolah. That cannot be eaten. That's tzadik beis, amid beis, top line. But interestingly, beautifully, the gefanim, from the perspective of the gefanim, from their perspective, there's a wall separating the gedolah from the ketana, because there's 2 side posts that they can see. From their perspective, if there's a wall, like we mentioned, whatever is planted on the other side of the wall is not a problem. So they mutarim, they can eat their vines. This is the best trivia question. So you can have kalayim, but it only answers on one side. Wow, we're not done yet. Now another chiddush. What happens if there is already gefanim b'ktana? You already have gefanim b'ktana. And we are saying that the small environment has no influence on the bigger. So says this Riyamaroi mutar l'zroyas hagedolah. Wow, you can plant in the gedolah because nothing of the ketana goes into the gedolah. Now, hold on. But now everyone asks, now that you planted the greens in the gedolah, I know that the greens should remain mutter. But why does that not aser the kedem? Because the yoyre gedolah does go into the ketana, so that's Rashi's word. That since we're speaking here about only climate the rabbanon, and even though the Chachamim said even by climate the rabbanon it's asur b'hana, when is asur b'hana? If the maisa of planting was against the rabbinic rule. But since muter l'zroyas hagedolah, even though from the perspective of the ketana, the gefanim now are being influenced by the zeraim. Doesn't matter. I don't care. Because since you were allowed to plant it, it doesn't bring any isur. Amazing. Okay, let's go weiter. It's especially getting late. Line number 2, application number 2. Application number 2 of this statement of the Sri Amayroim that the yoyre gedolah ketana, the ein ketana gedolah. Statement number 2 is about gittin. It's beautiful. These sugyas that you make a chazar of so many dinim. One of the dinim of a get, emes, that the get, the nasan biyada, doesn't have to be physically biyada, okay? And we say chatzeroi shel adam, whether it is as shlichus, whether it is as yad, that a man can put the get in the property of his ex-wife to be, and it should affect a get. However, in Masechtas Gittin, there is a machlokes. Our Gemara is following one side of the argument that holds that when is placing a get in her property effective? If the woman is present in that property. If she's not present in that, she's not there, even though it's hers, the get will not be effective. And now you have the whole thing. So Isha, if the woman is standing, now she owns the chatzir that's gedola and katana. It's all hers. Really, we also learned that when it's all hers, masha kana Isha kana baila. So we have the whole concept of gita v'yada boim ke'achas chatzeira, gita v'chatzeira boim. That's a whole beautiful amda shasugya. We are saying that if she'll get divorced, it will belong to her. We view it now as it belongs to her. The only thing we're trying to figure out is whether she is present on that property. If she's standing on the gedolah and the man delivers the get on the small chatzir, so then she will be divorced. Why is that? Because the small, what are we saying, is an annex of the large. The small is an annex of the large. So he placed the get on the property, and she's present, but not in the other way around. This whole one-way wall. If the woman is standing in the katana, and what did we say? Ein de yoyre katana b'gedolam. It doesn't extend into the gedolam. Even though he placed the get b'gedolam, einam is gareshes. One-way wall. Chevra application number 3. These are all very halacha l'maisa applications. The one with the get, God willing, it should not be halacha l'maisa at all for anyone. Or
Rabbi, in the case of the get, we're saying both the large and the small area belong to the woman. It's just a question of which side he puts it in. That's the nafkamina here? Exactly.
Yes.
Meaning the whole thing belongs to the woman. But if he puts it in the small side, then it's okay. But if he puts it in the large side, it's not.
Big side, correct.
Right.
So that was the yoyre gedolam katana, the ein is with that. Now, what about a shliach tzibur?
One second, but if she's in the small side and he puts it in the small side,
that's for sure good. Oh, for sure good.
This is just where he put it in the opposite side to where she was standing.
That's it.
Okay, shkayach, sorry.
Okay. Now, 4 lines from the top. A shliach tzibur. Who's the ikar and who's the tafel? The shliach tzibur or the tzibur? The tzibur is the ikar. The shliach tzibur, especially in those days that he davened loud, mamish for everyone, people listened and they were yoitza. The ikar, and therefore when we want to know whose perspective is the most important, it's not the shliach tzibur. He's not the big knacker. The tzibur is the ikar. He is tafel to the tzibur. He's the shliach of the tzibur. So what's going to happen if the tzibur is standing in the large chatzir, and the shliach tzibur is standing alone in the small chatzir, and he's davening? He's biktana. It's not about hearing. They're hearing him and they are seeing him. But the shliach tzibur has to be in the same environment as the shliach tzibur has to be with the tzibur in the same environment, the same reshus. So in our case, again, yoitzim yedei chavasam, because the katana is an annex of the gedolah, so he's in the gedolah. But if in the reverse, if the tzibur is in the katana, and ain't the yoyre katana b'gedolah, it doesn't influence the gedolah. So if the tzibur is in the katana and the shliach tzibur is in the gedolah, the shliach tzibur is not standing where he needs to stand from the perspective of the kahal, and that is what counts. We don't care about the perspective of the shliach tzibur. He's tafel, he's the shliach of the tzibur. And let's move weiter. A 4th application. Forget about a shliach tzibur, a minyan itself. Now, I want you to know another nuance that we have a machlokes in halacha. According to many poskim, that as long as part of the minyan can visually see the other part, when we're speaking about seeing, it doesn't mean to see their whole bodies. It can mean just seeing their faces. Like it happens often that you have a couple of people downstairs, and if there's a ladies section that's upstairs, and you can only see the face, that's good enough. According to those shitas, our Gemara is speaking about a scenario where they cannot see each other. Because if they can see each other, it's a non-issue. They can see each other. Even if they can't see each other, if they are in the same room, it's good. So here, weiter. Tisha, 9 people of the minyan, which means the roiv of the minyan is in the large room, in the large chatzah. V'yachid, in our case, it's 9-1. And one is biktana, so nachamol. the katana is considered an annex of the gedolam. So therefore, he's considered standing with everyone else, and therefore we can combine them as a minyan. However, if it's going to be in the opposite, that 9 people of the minyan are in the small one, and again, this is their nuance, this is their additional layer built on the ending words of the Mishnah, that ain't the yoyrik tanam gedolam. It's considered a wall that separates one way. From their perspective, they don't go in, and the one is in the gedolah, so ein mitztarfin. Here it's also whose perspective are we focusing on? Obviously, on the roiv. Another application, when there's tsoya, when there's excrement regarding saying Shema or davening or learning. Now, I guess another nuance that the Gemara is not mentioning. If there is an odor that makes it bad, even if halachically you are in a different domain, if it doesn't smell okay, you may not articulate the words. You can think, you can't speak. Here we're speaking about a scenario that the tsoya doesn't have a bad odor. It's halachically still called tsoya. Is it present in your room? Same thing. If the tsoya is in the gedolah, you're standing in the katana. The influence of the gedolah protrudes into the katana, so therefore also likris kiyashma b'katana, because you are in the presence of tsoya. But if the tsoya is only in the katana and you're standing in the gedolah, the influence of the katana doesn't go into the gedolah. Muta likris kiyashma b'gedolah. So these are 5 applications of these 3, Rabba, Rab Zera, Rabba Bar Bar Chanin, based on the words katana is kepischa. The whole katana is like an entranceway to the gedolah. So Abaya is listening to all this, and Abaya is making up a protest, a middle of the Amid. Amaluhu Abaya, to all 3 of them. Oy bazoi, if what you're saying is correct, you're telling me something that's wondrous, it's shocking. Motzinu mechitza le'isur? In other words, every halach in the Torah, we're learning now Hilchos Shabbos, Hilchos ERUVIN. A mechitza is a solution. When there's a lack of a mechitza, sometimes you have a problem. Here, every single time, this concept of a one-way wall in every scenario is creating an isur. And let's use an example, my friends, of the kalayim. What was the first thing we learned? That you cannot plant greens in the small chutzner. The first case, you have already a kedem in the large one. The kedem is within 4 amos of the entrance. You have a kedem. Normally, if there would not have been a wall, then you would say, measure 4 amos, and beyond that, plant greens, gesundheit. Here you're saying that because there is a mechitza, that one mechitza makes the whole chatzar katana an annex of the gedolah. It makes the whole chatzar katana an entranceway, a pischa of the gedolah. So here, what logic? By kalayim, like we mentioned, by kalayim, if you have a mechitza, you can plant mamish near each other on opposite sides of the wall. So where you're telling me that because there is a mechitza creates an isur. That was his like statement. Im kein motzina mechitza leisur. Shilmale ein mechitza. Even if what you have in the gedolah is not a individual vine from which you only need 6 tefachim. No, it's a kedem. Remember, 3 rows, however you define the kedem. So the max is marchik daladamas. And then vizoreya. My friends, vizoreya doesn't only mean the greens. You can even what's aser midoiraisa can be planted. The ilu hashta, because it's a one-way barrier, a barrier should be lamal yusa. How can it be like listen, it could be. They hold it is. But it was something that we never heard in any other place in the Torah, that a barrier, that a mechitza creates an isur. And the Gemara is wondering the wonderment of Abaya. We're going to try now. We'll begin today. We'll continue tomorrow. Hold on, Abaya. What, this is the only time that you heard such a thing? Is there no other area where the more mechitzas you add, the worse it gets? Let's push back. Our Mishnah. Let's go to our Mishnah. Chatzir gedolah, shenifretz aliktana, gedolah muteres, right? That means the houses of the gedolah can carry to the chatzir of the gedolah, because from their perspective, they are enclosed. They don't have to be ma'arav with the chatzir katana. However, the people that live in the houses of the katana, even though they made a internal eruv with the bnei katana, but that's not enough, because there's other people here. It's nifretz abemaloyoy. The katana asurim epnei, the words of the Mishnah, kepischa shegedolah. Now says Rab Zera to Abaya, let me show you how adding walls won't be a solution, will be a problem. And here you need a picture. If you would add 2 walls on both sides of the chutzner, making now from the perspective of the Gedolah. When they're going to look into the katana, if someone can put up a picture, they will not see the side posts. Why will they not see side posts? If you see a picture or you see it in your mind, because you're putting towards that whole in length of a chutzner side posts that narrow in the Gedolah. If you put two mechitzas on both sides of a Gedolah, that makes it perfectly aligned with the katana. You're adding a whole mechitz on one side, a whole mechitz on the other side. In that case, now there's no more side posts. Now, both of them are nifritza b'maloya l'makayim ha'asrloi. Both of them have to be ma'arav altogether. Neither of them will be allowed to carry. So here also you have a scenario where both adding mechitzas adds an isur. Says Abaya, that's a horrible example. Amalei Abaya, I know, even if you're adding mechitzas, you're not really adding, no, that's not the picture. Even if you're adding mechitzas in the way that we described is not adding mechitzas. Adding mechitzas, the way we described, is removing the side posts. Yes, removing mechitzas creates an isur. Physically, you're putting down two walls. But these two walls you really didn't need because the chutzner already has two walls. The mechitzas that we are adding over here, if you'll have a picture, are walls that doesn't allow the gedolah to be gedolah anymore. It narrows it out to be in the same width as the katana. It's making it narrower. You're taking away the side posts. Says Abai, second to last line. The example that you're giving, where adding a mechitza brings an isur, is because really you're not adding. How physically you are, not halachically. Silug mechitzusu. One more pushback. We have another few minutes. Amalei Rav Abaya. Again, you're wondering on the conclusion of the statement of these three Amoraim, Rabbi Zayda, Rabbi Hanan. What are you telling me? That this is the only place you heard a scenario like by Kalayim, that dafka, because there is this one-way mechitza, it adds to the prohibition. V'loi motzinu in any other place mechitza le'isur. Yes, there is another place. Itma daf tzadik gimel. Here again, guys, if you have a picture, it's going to be gemoidedik. If not, let's do the best to articulate this. We're speaking here about the dinim of a sukkah. What's the din of a sukkah? Well, schach, but you have to have at least two full mechitzas and a little mechitza of a tefach. Guys, imagine you have an achsadra, you have an outside portico, but it's not, don't think pillars and schach. No. On two sides of the portico, there's full walls. Two sides are almost open, but the poles that are at the corners are so thick that each one is a tefach wide. By a sukkah, pungut, two walls and even one tefach wall is showing good. So says sichach al gab achsadra, if you put schach on this type of achsadra that has two full walls, and the sheyesh ba patzimin, in other words, these posts, these pillars are gesund. They are one tefach thick or more, then it's kesheda. Because you have a wall and then you have it coming out a little bit. Now here he says the same thing. If you were to add inner walls, if you were to add walls in a way that if you stand inside of this achsadra, you don't see the outer wall and from it an L shape, a 45 angle, a perpendicular angle, the side post. If you put a wall over here, so when you're standing inside the achsadra, you only see the two sides. You don't see the side post. Here again, adding a wall brings an isur. The ilu hishva pitzimeo, again, it's going to be possible because you don't have the third wall. So Amalei Abaya again, Abaya tells him the following, that lididi, this is Gavaldik, lididi ksheda, there's another nuance here, and we'll learn about this soon, on Daf Tzadik Hey. Rashi's 14 lines from the top of the Amit. Here there's another whole din of whether we use pitikra yored v'soisim. B'chlal Abaya holds, by the way, that you don't need any walls here. There's a case where Abaya subscribes to pitikra yored v'soisim. You have halachic 4 walls. By the way, he says, and for me it's taka kosher. But according to you, we'll learn about the Daf Tzadik Hey, that you don't use pitikra. Here again, if you're adding walls, physically you're adding walls. But if you add walls, which makes the area under the chsadra narrower, not allowing the patzimin to protrude in, you're not adding a wall, you're removing a wall. So yes, removing walls creates an isur. And I stand my ground that I'm wondering, how can these three Amoraim come to a conclusion where you're going to have this unusual phenomenon that adding a wall having a wall creates an isur? Normally it should not be that way. Having a wall should be the opposite. It should create something, it should make things more permissible, not more prohibited. God willing, to be continued.
Rabbi, when he says you're actually removing the wall, he means when you're adding that wall on the side, you're effectively removing the wall of the tefach.
Yes. It's halachically removing the wall of the tefach.
Got it.